Hello, and welcome to Missouri's Civil War. Today we begin our 8-week course by looking at the backstory. Historians often look to the firing upon Fort Sumter by Confederate troops as the start of the Civil War, and with good reason. But today I think it's necessary that we step back and to set the context. First, geographically, to look at Missouri and its various regions. Next, to look at the succession of peoples that will be moving through the state by 1860. And then lastly, we look at the first time when Missouri really becomes a flashpoint in American history. And of course, it's a division over slavery, as it will often be. Let's begin our journey with a quick look at Missouri geography. It's always helpful to get a lay of the land, right? Missouri is a quintessential border state. Through the early 1800s, Missouri was the settlement frontier, and its location at this point where the West collided with the North and the South meant that Missourians were quite literally caught in the middle. The West had long been the place where Americans went to reinvent themselves and to recreate their society. And Missouri, we will see, stands front and center at debates about American expansion and freedom. Missouri is a middle state in many ways. If you look at a map of the United States, you see that Missouri is smaller than nearly every state to its west, and it's larger than every state to its east. And remember this, as in future lectures we discuss troops marching or riding hundreds of miles all within its state borders. Missouri sits in the broad ecotone between the drier grasslands to the west and the more humid forested lands to the east. To the north you find the frost belt with its snowier and colder winters, and to the south is the sun belt with its longer growing season. And most Missourians, myself included, understand we know what this means, because when you're caught between dry, cold Arctic air and the warm, moist air of the Gulf of Mexico, you're going to suffer blizzards, tornadoes, blistering heat, humidity, and everything in between. As Missourians tell each other, if you don't like the weather, just wait a few hours because it's going to change. The state of Missouri consists of 5 geographical regions. The first of these regions, and perhaps the most important, are the big rivers, a region to themselves, because they will shape so much of Missouri's early history. The Mississippi River runs southward along Missouri's eastern border for 485 miles. On the other side of the state is the Missouri River, also flowing southward before it runs to the east and then pours into the Mississippi just above the city of St. Louis. The Ohio River, meanwhile, meets the Mississippi near southeastern Missouri. These great rivers were the superhighways of the 19th century. That meant so much of the nation's traffic in people and in goods, it's passing along and through this state. It's no accident that Missouri's largest cities will take shape near the confluence of these great rivers and their lesser tributaries. And it's not surprising that the earliest settlers will flock to the rich alluvial soils that hug these rivers too. The next region consists of the Ozark Highlands, and they might be the most famous of Missouri's regions. The Ozarks consist of 3 parts. On the east are the St. Francis Mountains. The ancient Precambrian rocks here are among the oldest in North America, and they contain some of its most lucrative lead mines. In the middle sits the Salem Plateau, which runs from central Arkansas up into Missouri. And then to the west, where I'm standing today, is the Springfield Plateau. The soils in the Ozarks, if you've never visited, they're rocky, they're thin, it's heavily forested, not great farmland, but spectacularly beautiful, and that will come into play at different points during the course. Unlike the thin, cherty soils of the Ozarks, the next 2 regions offer very good farmland. The Osage Plains lie west of the Ozarks and south of Kansas City. Before settlement, this rolling, unglaciated landscape contained some of the state's most extensive tall grass prairies. The glaciated plains lie north of the Missouri River, and this is most of Missouri to the north. And this marks the southernmost advance of glaciers into Missouri. And what it means was that this region boasts lush soils, wind-blown silt, that make for some of the most fertile farm ground in the state. Finally, In the southeastern corner, jutting below Missouri's long, straight boundary with Arkansas, is the Mississippi Alluvial Plain, more commonly known as the Boot Heel. Alluvial deposits give this smallest region rich soils. Eventually, this will be a cotton-producing region, but it will take some time and massive drainage projects because until the 20th century, much of this corner of the state will remain submerged, very swampy, very wet. Missouri geography, especially its location near the confluence of the great rivers, helps to explain the dynamic and the diverse peoples that had inhabited this area through the mid-1800s. You've got so much here in this mixed environment. You've got rich farmland, you've got abundant timber, you've got tremendous mineral resources, and so it's quickly prized by a succession of groups. The earliest Missourians arrived here as many as 10,000 years ago. Roughly 1,000 years before the present, the most sophisticated native civilization north of Mexico took shape just east of St. Louis at Cahokia. By 1250, the Cahokian peoples had built one of the largest cities in the world at that time, larger than London or Paris. It was an incredible mound-building civilization. And as it faded for reasons that are still not altogether clear, a succession of other indigenous groups will appear. The Quapaw, the Illini, the Missouri, and the Osage. The Osage will emerge as the most powerful Native American group prior to statehood. By the late 18th century, European explorers, traders, and priests and settlers, they've all populated the west bank of the Mississippi. French immigrants will build communities at St. Genevieve and then to the north at St. Louis. And this area will shift from French control, or at least a French claim, to Spanish hands and then back to the French before it is eventually acquired by the United States in the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. The following year, President Thomas Jefferson sends Meriwether Lewis, William Clark, and their Corps of Discovery up the Missouri River to see what the United States had actually bought for itself. Lewis and Clark become the most famous Americans to explore this part of Upper Louisiana. But in the first decade of the 19th century, many others soon follow. Most of these early pioneers come from the Upper South states of Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia. And this heavy Southern influence is significant for several reasons. Among the group who streams into Missouri during this time was the famed explorer Daniel Boone. He and his adult sons establish a salt refining venture in the area of the Missouri Valley, which becomes known as the Boone's Lick. Years later, the continued influx of Southern migrants earned these river counties in central Missouri the nickname Little Dixie. So strong was the Southern influence there. And you can see another sign of Southern influence in the fact that when it came time to choose a name for the state capital, they of course named it after President Jefferson, a Virginian. Many of these upland Southerners also brought slaves into the Missouri Territory. They were not the first slaveholders in this part of the country. The Osage and other tribes had practiced a kind of slavery. French settlers used slave labor to exploit the lead mines of the eastern Ozarks. And under French colonial law, the Code Noir, there were specific legal punishments and rights that both enslaved and free people of color enjoyed. Among its terms, for example, the Code Noir forbade the sale of children from their parents. In the United States, meanwhile, there's a developing law regarding slavery too. Congress passed the Northwest Ordinances in the 1780s, and these prohibited slavery from taking root east of the Mississippi and north of the Ohio River. Congress did not pass any such restrictions to the south of the Ohio. And with the acquisition of Louisiana, the fate of slavery was yet undetermined. But it's important to remember there was already a significant number of slaves within Missouri Territory. With the organization of Missouri Territory in 1812, formally, leaders implanted a black code modeled closely after the Commonwealth of Virginia. Missouri petitioned for statehood in 1819. By that point, white leaders had driven out most Native Americans, including the Osage. The continued presence of slaves within the territory became a matter of national significance. Northern politicians, worried that the prospect of a new slave-owning state beyond the Mississippi, that would become the first of many slave states. In the years since the American Revolution, so we're talking about almost a half century, northern states had moved toward abolishing slavery, doing so in a gradual or incremental and compensated fashion. The southern states, meanwhile, slavery had become more deeply entrenched there. The United States had maintained an equal number of free and slave states, and Northerners feared that new slave states would disrupt this sectional balance. They worried that national politics had become increasingly dominated by white slaveholders in the South, and they looked no further than the presidency. 4 of the first 5 men to hold that office had come from Virginia, and a slave-owning Missouri, in the eyes of these Northern observers, further strengthened the South's grip upon American politics. And so, to check the spread of slavery into the West, a congressional representative from New York named James Tallmadge proposed that Congress force Missouri to amend its constitution to ban the further importation of slaves into the state and to free all enslaved children upon the age of 25. Slavery under these terms doesn't disappear immediately, but slavery is put on a path to extinction, as has happened in most northern states. Tallmadge's proposal split Congress along clearly sectional lines. Northern members supported the restrictions, and Southerners opposed them. The proposal thus failed in the House of Representatives, and Missouri's petition for statehood stalled. Yet a compromise brokered by Henry Clay helped Congress out of this impasse. Under Clay's compromise, the sectional balance would be maintained by admitting both a slave and a free state. The free state was Maine. Maine prohibited slavery and had been formed out of territory once claimed by Massachusetts. Missouri would be admitted as a slave state and also without the restrictions proposed by Tallmadge. In addition, and here is the real point of the Missouri Compromise, Congress declared that slavery would be prohibited from any future states created from the Louisiana Purchase to the north of Missouri's southern border, or 36 degrees 30 minutes north latitude. And so everything to the north of that, except for Missouri, would be free soil. As the West would become settled, the state of Missouri would be surrounded. It would stick up like a thumb, surrounded by free states to its east, Illinois to the north, and then eventually to the west. There was another lesser-known compromise that proved necessary before Missouri became a state. There was a provision in the proposed Constitution to exclude, quote, all free Negroes and mulattoes, end quote, from the state. Such laws that attempted to limit immigration by free people of color eventually became common across much of the northern Midwest, from Ohio to Illinois and elsewhere. And in this case, Henry Clay sought to appease northern critics by securing a pledge from Missouri leaders that they would not enforce this provision, and thus Missouri became a state. These Missouri Compromises of 1820 and 1821 were successful inasmuch as they resolved the incipient sectional crisis, at least for the moment. Although Congress seemed to resolve the vexing question of slavery's fate in the developing West, the Missouri crisis exposed a rift, a widening rift, as we'll see in the next couple of videos, between the North and the South over slavery. And Thomas Jefferson, now no longer president, and a founding figure in Missouri history, he recognized this danger. He wrote in April 1820, "This momentous question, like a fire bell in the night, awakened me and filled me with terror. I considered it at once the knell of the Union." In our next video, we will consider Missouri's prominent role in the continued development of the West and how the struggle for Kansas territory brought an end to the Missouri Compromise and brought civil war to Missouri's doorstep. Until then.